There's a part in this gospel that we just read that unfortunately is not true. Not true. No one can swear by their hair on their head. They can't make it black or white. You can change the color of your hair. This is the only thing I found in the whole Bible when Jesus said something and it wasn't true. It just struck me because my hair used to be a different color and now it is. So, I love to hear the laughter of little kids. Actually, of anybody, to tell you the truth. Now, well, this gospel, though, is something that is really, really hard to hear, but it actually fits very, very well into our readings. Because part of what the readings say is that, look, God sets before us a choice. We get to choose if we're going to follow the commandments or not. And in terms of which ones we choose to follow, will mean it's the same as putting your hand out towards water or fire. You get to figure out what you're going to put your hand in. And so now Jesus is then talking about the commandments, the law, and he's talking about all the law, not just the parts that, for instance, we might hear in the Ten Commandments, but all the law. And so what did Jesus intend to accomplish when they said, you've come here you've come to abolish the law? Well, here's the problem. Dr. Ralph Wilson, American Baptist pastor, author, and discipler at Rock Harbor Covenant Church in Rockland, California, writes on this gospel. And I've chosen to steal liberally from all the wisdom that he had written. He has a very clear way of unwrapping this question about Jesus' teaching on the purpose and reach of the law. Dr. Wilson writes, Jesus doesn't seem concerned to follow the meticulous legal observance of the Pharisees. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. His disciples nibble at grain plucked on the Sabbath. They don't even wash their hands in a very particular manner, before eating. Are you supposed to do it with putting water on all the fingers and then letting it drip down your wrist? Doesn't he care about the prescriptions of the law? Well, Jesus states his position very clearly. Don't think I've come to abolish it. I've come not to abolish, but to fulfill. And Dr. Wilson contrasts these two words, abolish and fulfill. He says the word translated abolish, it means to destroy, demolish, dismantle, to end the effect of something so it's no longer in force, do away with, abolish, annul, make invalid, repeal. That's a strong word that is used, for example, in the destruction of the temple in Matthew. So with it, Jesus emphatically denies coming to destroy the law because he talks about that word is used in conjunction with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem when not a stone will be left upon a stone. So he doesn't come to do that, to tear down, not even the smallest part of a letter. He says Jesus came to make the law itself complete. And here's the deal. The Pharisees, in their attempt to obey legalistic minutiae, had prescribed and limited the application of the law. For instance, you cannot do work on the Sabbath. And so Jesus heals on the Sabbath. As you're violating the Sabbath law, he says, don't you water your ox and cattle, on the Sabbath? Don't you open the gate and lead them in and out to pasture? You do work on the Sabbath, work that's necessary. No, but they're saying, but you're not washing your hands, and you're eating these things without washing your hands, So Jesus came to make the law itself complete. And there was another thing, for instance, said, you cannot, if you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, these were the traditions of the elders, and the wisdom was built upon the tradition of the elders. When Jesus then gives something that is a fulfillment of it, when he says, what I say to you, you've heard this, but what I say to you, and that's seeking to get back to the full nature of the law, that God gives us the commandments can save us, and we pick and choose which ones, we shall follow. But the point is, you're supposed to follow the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And so, for instance, the whole idea of if you can't work on the Sabbath, can you carry the tools of your trade on the Sabbath? No, you cannot. Okay. And then here comes the poor tailor, coming into the synagogue to offer his gift at the altar, and he's wearing a vest, and in it he's got some chalk and some needle and thread, and they're going, aha! Got another one. So people became to be terrified. Who can be saved if we're always in trouble? Now, Jesus says, for instance, when the law said, "Thou shalt not kill," which is certainly something very major. One time I was here in confession, and a man said, "I haven't been here in a long time." This was long ago. I had black hair then, a long time ago. And I said, he says, "I don't know where to begin." I said, "Well, let's start with the commandments." And he says, "Well, I haven't killed anyone." And I said, "I'm really glad to hear that." And he says, "Why?" I said, "Because you and I are the only ones in this empty church right now, Imagine if he come in and said, "I need to confess a sin, Father. I haven't been here for a while, "Oh, okay. What's the sin?" "I like to murder priests, And I get like, how come you haven't been in church for a while?" "I've been running from the law, I've been hiding under your porch for the last month, as a matter of fact, I don't even know why I took that far. That really wasn't necessary. Well, when he says, "Thou shalt not kill," it means more than just the act itself of murder, but the anger and lack of respect for a person that leads us to do murder. The lack of the anger and the lack of respect for the human dignity of a person that leads us to kill them. You only have to look at the gun violence in this country to see that. You only have to look at how sometimes the effect of the law is applied to people who are poor, and the difference between how it's applied to the rich and how it's applied to the poor. What kind of support do the people have who are rich and are a really wonderful lawyer, or many of them? And what happens to the person who just gets, the advocate who might have 100 cases on his plate at any one time? So you have to say, what is the thing that leads us to these moments? And he uses the same thing with regard to, for instance, lust and adultery. And he says, though, he takes it more complete. It's not just anger and disrespect for the person, but other things that lead to that. So that if anger leads to murder, what leads to disrespect? And he says, "I tell you that anyone who's angry with his sister or brother will be subject to judgment. For in anyone, it says to his brother or sister, Raka, which it says answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." Well, Raka was a way of saying, like, you're not thinking right, you're stupid. Now that's not a word that we tend to use properly anymore now. Ignorant would be a little bit better, but and even the old church, when it talked about people who were in error, they didn't just say they were stupid. They said, well, there's ignorance, but there's vincible ignorance and invincible ignorance. Vincible ignorance meant the person could be taught. Invincible ignorance meant people say, "You can't tell me." And how many times have we heard that in our lives? You can't tell me. So we have a choice as to how we are going to not only act, but how are we going to regard? How are we going to regard the commandments? How are we going to regard one another? And then, what flows from those actions? The word fool doesn't just mean, you're acting, unwisely. What it means is there's something wrong with you. Your character, your mind, your heart. There's something really wrong with you. And that's one reason why it's so difficult for me in the church, for instance, to hear when everybody wants to pick on somebody else if they're different. Pick whatever the difference is. And what do we do instead of trying to decide or figure out, well, despite our differences, how can we help one another and love one another? But we're really happy to point to the differences. I've got other couple things I was going to say, but I don't think I'll say it right now. Only because it'll take me a little bit longer to get into the meat. I'll take that up another time. When I say it, I hope I'll have the right words to do it. So it's ought to scare us. If, for instance, we get in trouble, just for calling somebody, stupid or foolish. Here's the problem. Who hasn't been angry and insulted someone? Of course, we can get legalistic and say, well, we haven't used the exact word, raka, or fool, but that's the same kind of word gymnastics for which Jesus condemned the Pharisees. Jesus is saying we're guilty before God for a heart that lashes out in venom and anger. Whether or not a person's life is terminated as a result is not the point. And the point of the person coming to confession wasn't, well, I haven't murdered anybody. It's sort of like, well, good, yes, and I can't argue with that, that's good. But is there anything else in your life that perhaps is in need of some repair? Not that comes to any mind, I don't know. I think I was wrong once, but I was wrong about that, so. Now here's this thing, why is this so important? Little things like this, little things mean a lot. So, and this is what Dr. Wilson said, but I remembered this. It says, when I was a boy, we would parrot this saying to someone who called us a name. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Unfortunately, that is not true. Words do hurt. Names injure us, sometimes for life. How many of you, and this is where Dr. Wilson says this so clearly, how many of your friends have spent years struggling with what your father or mother said to you in a fit of anger, plagued by it, your self-confidence destroyed? Those things stick. And it's not just when we're children and people tell us that. It's when we are adults and we find ourselves disrespected, victimized, put down lower in regard to the systems that we have as to who is up and who is down. And we keep people in those systems. That's the reason why when sometimes people say, when we hung that sign in front of church saying, work to end racism, some people got very upset and said, I didn't know I was racist. Sit there and said, well, you may not believe that you were racist, but surely racism exists, and it's up to the church to be able to work against those things because that's a sin. And the other part, too, is we examine our lives. There's many ways that while we might not be overtly racist, we do find that we are prejudiced. We do find that we treat people poorly based upon prejudice. We are not guilt-free just because we haven't used the N-word. And that's one reason why it was so important when people were gathering to say, our lives matter too. We say, everybody's life matters. Yeah, but our lives matter. Black lives matter. And they said, well, that's divisive. I said, well, the only reason we're saying it is because we're being slaughtered. We deserve respect. And then people say, well, I don't know why you think we're racist. That's politics. I can't come to church and hear that. But Jesus is precisely saying there is the social component of the law and the commandments and the gospel, and we have to get down to fine-tuning our hearts and our minds to be able to say, well, I haven't done that or I haven't done that. We have to look at what is it that is the basis of our thinking and our acting that then leads us to maybe not be a murderer, but be somebody who really has killed somebody's reputation with gossip. And perhaps it wasn't true at all, just something that we heard and passed on. Everybody's getting quiet right now. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? We're thinking like, oh, I did that, yeah. So he says, anger and the venom it inspires kills the spirit, and those who spew this acid on those about them are not free from judgment. The God who condemns murder also condemns angry insult, for they both come from the same root. He says, so what are the upstanding moral people who never kill, who never drive the speed limit, never break the law? What of them? Are they to be consigned to the fires of hell for hatred in their hearts? And this is hard to hear, but the answer we must come to is it can happen. It can happen. Left unrepentant, hatred, not just murder, can destroy our soul and our relationship with God. Over time, it can become a truly mortal sin. We are no longer able to hear godly instruction because we say, that's not me, or, that's not what I come to church to hear. That's the social gospel. But Jesus says anyone who comes to leave their gift at the altar and there remembers that his sister or brother has something against them, not you have something against your sister or brother, they have something against you, leave your gift, go and be reconciled, and then come. And then he says this, sometimes we labor under the ancient myth that we can earn heaven by our good deeds. No, Jesus would say we must repent. We're all sinners. And he says the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. These make a person unclean. Out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are the things that make a person unclean. But eating with unwashed hands does not make them unclean. It's what comes out of the mouth, not what goes into it. And even though Jesus couldn't have been clearer, all people said was, he's breaking the law. He's come to abolish the law. Jesus says, no, I'm trying to fulfill it. And here's the deal. Can you and I live so circumspectly that we do not break the law of the pure heart? Can we live in such a way that we need no forgiveness? Mortal sin and venial sin. In the past, we believed that only mortal sins were deadly. But what we know now is venial sins can lead to a disruption of our relationship with God. And so, in a sense, the law, thou shalt not kill, is an outpost to regulate the limits of our behavior, but the golden center of the law, as Dr. Wilson says, is something else. Is God seeking non-murderers? No, he's seeking those who do not let anger and hatred live in their hearts at all. He's seeking those who will show mercy, those who will forgive, those who will, in a word, love. And so what becomes complex to the legalists becomes much more simpler to grasp when Jesus then said, look, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the aim of the whole law and the prophets. And this is straight from the mouth of God himself in the person of Jesus Christ. And that is why it's appropriate for us to talk about it in church in all the ways that it relates in society. That's why it's important for us to talk about it. That's not politics. That's people.